On mission 4, when we got to the surface, Scott was piloting. He heard a really loud bang, not a soothing sound.
No.
Almost every deep diving sub makes a noise at some point.
We know that the carbon fiber was starting to react differently at depth based on the incident that occurred on dive 80.
Well, we were ascending. I think we were fairly close to the surface, and there was a large bang or cracking sound.
We know that the carbon fiber was starting to react differently at depth based on dive 80.
The fatal dive on June 18, Father's Day, was dive 88. But a dive 8 dives earlier provided a fair warning. All they had to do was look critically at the data to know where it was going.
It is really, in my mind, like the smoking gun of what eventually caused this.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the smoking gun of what eventually caused this. With about 15 minutes remaining, the Netflix documentary Titan, the OceanGate submersible disaster, which really ought to win an award, and I believe it will, finally brings out the big guns. That is to say, the bottom line. In terms of the central issue, and I suspect the key legal area, is finally made clear by none other than the U.S. Coast Guard Marine Board Investigation Chair, Mr. Jason Neubauer. It's incredible that they got Neubauer to participate, especially since the investigation hasn't been finalized and the final report is still pending. What I appreciate from Neubauer is that in the documentary on camera, he is explicit about what the investigation found, in terms of the fatal flaws undermining the submersible. This was the part that I found the most compelling, the most authoritative in the entire documentary. This is essentially the conclusion the Coast Guard have come to after their investigation.
The vessel was still able to make additional dives after that occurred, but the data changes significantly after dive 80. That's where the real-time monitoring system could have been a huge benefit. Because it is showing additional fibers are breaking. And that should have been a warning.
And what he's talking about here is the carbon fiber starting to react differently at depth following this dive 80. After dive 80, it seems like the craft, the vessel, has already been substantially weakened, and from then on there seems to be an inflection point. Now, it's unfortunate that at this point, Netflix uses kind of sound effects and music, so you can't really hear the sounds that are actually being recorded. I am going to do a separate episode where we deal with those sounds separately, the few sounds that are recorded and have been presented, these snap, crackle, pop sounds, and especially Stockton's reaction to them. We are going to be dealing with that. But I really want to emphasize here, what we get from Neubauer here is finally authoritative, informed insight from the chair of a comprehensive investigation into Titan, saying that the issue is with the carbon fiber. That is what I've been saying all along. That is what the final outcome, the final decision appears to be in this. Do you need me to replay it?
We know that the carbon fiber was starting to react differently at depth based on the incident that occurred on dive 80.
So the issue is with the carbon fiber, not the glue, not the titanium domes, not different materials, not the type of acrylic, not the thickness of the acrylic, not the steel inner hull, or the PlayStation controller. Now, before we get to the rest of this analysis, as I say, I'm going to be continuing my review of this documentary and just highlighting certain aspects. If you're interested in that and you haven't hit the subscribe button, you might want to get notifications. If you found my work on this case meaningful and you want me to continue with it, please do hit the thanks button and let's get started. Now, while I've covered this story, this has been the part that's astonished me the most. I'm not an engineer, my brother is. But, it was clear from the beginning that what was different about the submersible to all the others was its defining feature, carbon fiber. We are here thinking about this, talking about this, because one wealthy, egotistical former aeronautical engineer thought that he could apply aerospace to submersible science. And what is the material of the moment right now in aeronautical engineering? It is being deployed even on commercial airlines. You are flying in a craft partially made of carbon fiber, a composite craft. You might want to take an interest in the properties of this craft. Composite materials don't last forever. So you might want to ask, what is the life of the carbon fiber on an aircraft? And so in terms of Stockton, he wanted something lightweight and cheap. And so he just dipped into his engineering knowledge of aerospace and aeroscience. And really, submersible science was overridden by that knowledge and also then by economics and ego. And I think there was the Dunning-Kruger effect. I know a lot about aeronautical science. I'll just apply it to this. It's similar. Is it? Has that been proved to be so? I personally don't think it's rocket science, but for some apparently it is. And although it's not that complicated, apparently it is too complicated for some to grasp. I think if that's you, you need to do some soul searching. Not here, not about this, but perhaps in your own life and simply in your basic ability to let reality speak to you. And if you don't appreciate this even being said to you, perhaps it's even more important that you consider this. Instead of, are you someone who always wants to frame, spin, interpret, or twist reality in some way? Well, then you might be heading for disaster. And me saying this is a fair warning, just like what you see from these sensors. Are you going to respond to the warning or not? Do you think you can do that, or is it a personal insult even to be asked to do some self-examination? Are we able to think in terms of process, or do we think in random instance of now? Do we anticipate how something can evolve, change, unfold as a series of actions, or do we simply respond to one thing at a time out of context? It's ironic because in a real sense, having this profound goal of unlocking deep sea exploration to the masses, and I agree, it is a noble cause, making it accessible, being a hero of your own story, that's a process too. That's an evolution as well. That is a changing, unfolding of events, a narrative. So do you see there's an appreciation and ability, a discerning ability to see things out of time, but as long as they suit you, out of the moment, as long as that suits you. And so what I think is happening is the allure, the yearning for the one process means that one is blind to the other. And so when these individual actions and incidents occur, then one counters that because this other process is invalidating your process, your journey, and I guess you. And so do you nix or neutralize or make excuses for one thing at a time, each signal individually, in order to convince yourself there isn't a countercurrent to the wash that you're trying to get going? And I think you can save yourself a lot of anguish by recognizing this capacity in yourself, and this will help you when the next set of circumstances comes along that you might be primed to be in denial about. There's a saying that the test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing ideas in the mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function. And that's from F. Scott Fitzgerald. But I think an even better test is to hold two opposing ideas in the mind and still have the alacrity to see which idea is ultimately the truer one, which idea is the more authentic. And that's regardless of your own attachments, your own anchors, or stake in the outcome. And we can see that Stockton was to some extent aware of what was opposing what he was trying to do, but he somehow just ended up subjugating it. He allowed the one idea to completely cloud this other process that was trying to talk to him.
Almost every deep diving sub makes a noise at some point.
Maybe use of fact or something that is true or reasonable to make excuses for something that should be overriding the overriding reality. And sometimes the overriding reality is hard to face. I think it often is. It's difficult. It's painful. And this is what makes the Scotsman David Lochred such a shining light in the story, because he literally was the only one who was so invested, so fully informed, had so much at stake, but who was also able to understand the process that was speaking to him as reality and respond to it in a fair and authentic way, regardless of his own ego, regardless of his own attachments, regardless of his own fear of failure. He was able to be honest about what was going on. Even his ability to walk away from his own lawsuit against OceanGate reveals a strength, I think, courage and integrity that is rare in this world. He really was a man for all seasons. He was precisely who and what OceanGate and Stockton needed. And the fact that there was so much enmity shows to what extent one man chose reality, chose to rise above all of this self-delusion, lying to oneself, lying to one another, showboating, all of that nonsense. One man chooses reality while another gets caught up in his own self-glorifying, fame-chasing fantasy. And it seems like Stockton's approach was,
all other priorities rescinded.
And a damn company. What about our lives, you son of a bitch?
it's not very nice being with people who place zero value in your lives or in the lives of other people. I want to conclude by referring to this review from Variety. I do want to give my overall review of this documentary, especially the final third, the final act, and I'll be doing that. But in that respect, here's a teaser. It is oddly in its last lap that Monroe's account loses some urgency. Perhaps that's because there is no footage or audio of the final fatal voyage, and I do think that that is quite likely. Not that none was recorded, but that the footage has been destroyed or withheld in some way, that it was something he simply couldn't get hold of. But the result of this is that we learn almost nothing about the ill-starred passengers beyond Rush and P.H. Nargile. It may be that there's no footage of the final dive because it was sold to a rival producer as well, the one made by Discovery. It's true that there is very little footage of the ill-fated passengers, British billionaire Hamish Harding and a Pakistani businessman Shahzada Dawood and his son Suleiman. It may be that their families contracted the rights to their stories to someone else as well. But the bottom line is their stories aren't told. Just based on this documentary, it seems even despite ending up where he vowed he wouldn't, in a watery grave, Stockton seems to have managed to silence the stories of those who were with him at the very end. These crucial stories right at the moment of spectacular, disastrous failure. This is a shame because this very human story is dehumanized at its most crucial center, the innocent passengers who died. We aren't told who they were, and the experience remains unknown to us. Perhaps Mark Monroe can make a part 2 to this otherwise exemplary effort, dealing with them with the same sensitivity and authenticity he mustered for this film. I'm not going to take it further than that. I do highly recommend you watch this documentary if you still have not, do so. Also, as the documentary notes in the final frame, no charges have been filed. So certainly at this point, it feels as though Stockton still managed to get the last laugh. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.